consciousness, the final frontier. These are the voyages into the universe between your ears. Our mission: to explore collective wisdom, seek out amazing secrets, and spread the message of personal potential.
All right. Hello, everybody in podcast land. I'm Tim C. Starr. I'm your host for this episode of The Universe Between Your Ears. My co-host, Mr. Gabi Musheyev, cannot join us today, so it's me and our guest. And that's a great segue into introducing our guest. Rob Scott is he's a master level coach who helps people shift their identities and make dramatic breakthroughs in all areas of their lives. Over the past decade, he's helped people who are struggling to succeed in various areas of life and work. Identity shifting, which is pioneered by Rob, teaches people how to rewire their limiting beliefs and ultimately leaves them completely transformed. Rob has pinpointed humanity's core issue, named the problem, crafted a solution. It's the problem of limiting our current identity, which is, I'm excited to jump into that. He's made it his mission to shift this mindset and create habits and behaviors that yield incredible outcomes. The result of the shift is people who are living to their full potential and achieving a level of success they once thought impossible to reach. Rob, thank you. Welcome.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. We met, 4 minutes ago or something.
Yeah.
But I'm on your email list, and I reached out to see if you'd be interested in coming on the show because of there are certain things that you have touched on in some of your emails that really, really resonate with me. Mindset is huge, in my opinion. I've got Mindset Missionary on my business card.
Yeah.
I recently saw some, just this past week, I was listening to a Wayne Dyer recording, and he said, perspective trumps everything. And he repeated it 2 or 3 times. And I was thinking about that. And it's like, there's nothing else. There's nothing else to say. The way you look at anything determines how you feel about it and everything else that goes from there. So,
yeah,
I'll let you try it.
No, there's a ton there. It's really interesting that one of the things I want to kind of speak into is the skill of perspectiving, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, are you capable of shifting your perspective in any given moment, right? Are you self-aware enough to know that a move in your perception or perspective of the moment can make a big game change, right? We're not just talking randomly, like, can that be done artfully and well? And if it can, you can't change everything, right? Something you said actually before we started recording was, maybe none of this is real or whatever. And I'll lovingly disagree. Just, I'm not saying you're wrong, because I play in that space too. And I like that idea a lot. But for the normal functioning adult to just say something that deep and like, this isn't real, it's all happening in your head, may not be totally useful for them. So let's just honor that there is stuff outside that can affect you. And as much as we may generate our own happiness, right, which we can, right? If you're a total mental master, you can stay way more satisfied than the average person. But if you are repeatedly getting punched in the face, there is a huge invitation to be miserable from that, right? Like, no matter how awake or how whatever, there are physical pains. If you were to, burn in fire, your body can't continue living. So, we do, to some degree, there's an outside that we need to deal with, right? That's real.
Absolutely.
But the amount of change that we can shift with our mindset, like what we can do on the other side of that, is so much more vast than most people realize, right? The actual shift, to your point, exactly what you're saying, the ability to move, just from I can't to I can, or, this is horrible, but I, think it can get better in the next little bit if I just keep pursuing, right? Those little moves are really the difference between excellence and complete failure, right? And so how do we get to a system where our default system, which our subconscious mind is so often on default set to overwhelm, shutting down. It's, I got embarrassed in 8th grade asking a girl out. Right. So now I don't have confidence or think I'm attractive. I lost money on my second stock deal I ever did. So I get scared about investing, and these are natural protection things that are in our being to keep us safe in some ways. And they're fantastic at that. And so I want to bow to them and honor them. But in our world that has become greatly nerfed compared to what it was even just a couple hundred years ago, right? It's so much softer and easier. We can live so much bigger lives. And this game of fulfillment and happiness and success, we don't have to just survive and have another baby to like do the evolutionary thing, right? There's a bigger game that we can be playing. And so I got very interested because of my own dysfunction and my own suffering, quite honestly, to really try to solve that. And I had really big breakthroughs personally. And then I worked really hard to figure out how can I share this with other people. And then I've been lucky enough to kind of make that my whole life, right? So this is like the game that I'm playing all the time. And it's one of the most meaningful, it's the most meaningful thing that I can come up with to do with my time. And it's really, really valuable.
I have not, I'm nowhere near what you're doing, but I have been lucky enough to have the experience. I did a couple of presentations at a school for at-risk kids.
Yeah.
And went completely off script right away. But we got into the subject of Think and Grow Rich and the ideas that are in that book. And I saw in particular one kid who was right in front of me and these are kids, some of them, they walk into this thing, they don't want to be there. They walk into it was done in a classroom.
Yeah.
And some of the older ones, they walked in with their hooded sweatshirts on, sat down in the back, pulled the sweatshirt over their face and went to sleep,
Yeah.
So none of them were like, oh, this is great, but a couple of them, and the one kid I remember really well, right in front of me, you see at some point the eyes go up and he's thinking, a little smile hits his face and you can almost literally see the wheels turning.
Yeah.
And I left that experience thinking, I want more of that.
Yeah.
Because you realize you're touching somebody and it may not go anywhere, but it may go everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's cliche, but it is so fulfilling. It's such a great feeling.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of people online talk about purpose in an interesting way. And, Martin Seligman, Dr. Martin Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania is testing certain things in positive psychology to say it's a different animal to go from real mental dysfunction to normal. And that's been the majority of the focus over, say, 75 years of what psychology has been trying to do. How do we stop crazy? How do we stop depression? How do we stop psychosis, right? That stuff. Well, Dr. Martin Seligman and a handful of others have been much more recently working on, how do you take average or normal or functional and make it exceptional? What does that look like? And a couple of the things that he's tested and found out are passions and purpose, right? The couple of P's. And passions are these really, they're selfish, not in a bad way, but they're what you're personally interested in. They're normally where you're going to find your flow states, right? There've been a great bunch of books out recently on finding flow. And a lot of people in the, startup and tech communities are all about, wow, if I could just find flow, that's beautiful. And we know that if you are finding your passions, right? Those passions could be basket weaving for somebody. It could be coaching. It could be accounting. It could be golfing. Whatever it is for you, it is for you. And that's great. And you may have more of them. It matters if you can find them and add them into your life. It measurably ups your pleasure or your satisfaction quotient of being a human being. But more than that, actually surprisingly more than that, is finding your purpose and really being in action toward that. And a lot of people online teach purpose as if it's just find your passions and do them, and then that's your purpose. And it's actually not the case. To me, passions are kind of internal and me focused. Purpose is external focus. Purpose is that thing that is something outside yourself that you find a great deal of meaning in being in service to, right? So it's your cause, it's your mission, right? So the obvious ones come to mind are like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, right? Huge purposes that may not be that pleasurable in the doing of them because they have this thing, but there's a deep fulfillment if you're in them. So anyway, that was a long way to get to. As you're noticing that child have that epiphany, that moment, there's a purpose there, right? You're standing for a bigger cause of getting people out of the natural suffering, and maybe I'm just speaking about myself now too, but it's like this is the only thing that's meaningful, or I should say the most meaningful thing for me to do, is to take somebody who's trapped in the prison of their own mind, and they're in their own suffering that I can see as unnecessary, and I can chart a path for them out of that so that they can have higher function, more ease, better meaning making, better emotional states, more, emotional state mastery, and ultimately better habitual doing without the endless willpower that most people think it takes to create change, right? There are these mental shifts that can really change the game. And often it takes, I'm somebody who survived cancer. Sometimes we get a big shift if we get really sick, and all of a sudden it's our values deeply change and we understand something differently, or someone in our life, something happens, or, there's some other tragedy. Hopefully, I've created ways and am using other people's ways to do that well before there's tragedy in your life, right? That's what I want to do.
That is such a big, it's such a big bonus. It's a big benefit for the individual who can be proactive about, recognizing that something is coming.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a crisis. Something is going to change in my world. Good or bad, doesn't matter. And that's just a label, right? But you see something coming and you don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
We stick our heads in the sand and hope that it's just going to, bypass us. And of course it virtually never does.
Yeah.
But if you can recognize it and then be proactive and take steps to at least influence what's coming, right? Maybe you can't avoid it. We're all going to get older, right? And there are things that go along with getting older, and certain things you just can't avoid, but you can make them less painful. You can make them less disruptive, right? Less of whatever negative adjective you want to give it, if you just get a little bit proactive about it. But we resist that so hard. And I the only thing I can point to myself is it just seems like that is really just, it's the ego, the lizard brain thing its sole job is to avoid any kind of change.
Yeah. The familiar. So it's like, it's interesting. There's a foundational function of the brain that I want to get into in a second. But before that, I want to say that our conscious mind has the motivation of pain versus pleasure, right? And we're marketers are drowning us in messaging to run away from the pain, don't be ugly, buy this lipstick, don't be poor, do this money-making scheme, whatever those things are, or the toward, have this dream of living on a beach or whatever that is, right? So we're in this toward and away from pain and toward pleasure. And we're very aware of that carrot and the stick, right? These are the functions of motivation for human beings to get up and do anything, really, right? I get up to avoid the pain of hunger, and I'm going toward the taste of good food, right? That's what we're doing all the time. What's interesting is that the subconscious mind is much more motivated by something close to that, but it's not quite the same. It's happy to avoid pain. It's trying very hard to avoid pain. That's a foundational thing all the way down. But it's more motivated to stay in the familiar than it is to actually figure out pleasure, right? If there's work to do with pleasure, and for a lot of reasons, partly the brain is trying to be efficient. It's not trying to overthink. There's a lot of cost energetically to thinking, so it's trying to be lazy. It's trying to find the habits that it can do basically on autopilot that aren't difficult. And it's really, and this kind of explains one of the things that I often use in some of my marketing material and out on my blog posts and stuff, is like this to me really explains like why the battered wife will often stay, right? When we look from the outside, it's like, what are you doing? Like, why that guy's clearly abusive. Why are but leaving is unknown, right? And that unknown can be scarier than the familiar. And so for most people, our familiar actually becomes fairly uncomfortable, right? It's not pleasurable, but we keep in it because it's familiar. We're used to it. We know, we know the devil in the details of our partner. We know this job, even though we're dying inside, but it's familiar. It feels safe, right? So that safety motivation, don't die, don't risk being exposed or embarrassed or all these things, right? And so that kind of keeps us shut down. The foundational thing that I wanted to share, and if I babble too much, just tell me to shut up or, whatever.
Are you going to go far off of this? Because I have an anecdote.
Yeah, actually, before I start the next thing, do that.
Okay.
What's your
and I've shared this on the show before, and I think that I got this from Zig Ziglar. I'm not sure, but it's basically, there's a traveling salesman driving through the countryside, and he comes to a farmhouse, and let's say he's selling insurance, and he drives up the gravel drive, gets up to the house, and gets out of the car and walks up the steps onto the porch, and laying on the porch is this hound dog.
Yeah.
And the dog just looks at him and, but he doesn't move. And so the guy is like, okay, well, he's all right. Knocks on the screen door, and the farmer happens to be there. He answers the door. The guy tells him who he is, what he's there about. Farmer says, I've been thinking about getting me some of that. Let's you and I have us a talk. Mm-hmm. And so they go and they spend some time on the porch, sit in some chair, drinking lemonade or iced tea, whatever, and they're having a conversation. And every once in a while, this dog lets out a little, and it becomes distracting. Eventually, the salesman asks him, he says, is he okay? He sounds like he's in pain.
Yeah.
Farmer says, he's just laying on a nail. The guy said, well, why doesn't he get up and move? It don't hurt him enough yet.
Yeah.
And that's how we operate.
It is.
We're familiar with that pain.
Yeah.
We know where it's going to go. And so we just deal with it until we can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Our fear about the possible future pain ends up way greater than what we're willing to endure in this moment. Right. Yeah. I totally get it. That's a great story. It illustrates it perfectly.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said kind of in the setup of me doing this talk is you wanted like a takeaway or two, right? Mm-hmm. So something we've already talked about is like passions and your purpose, right? Mm-hmm. From Dr. Martin Seligman, not even from me, go make sure that in your life, listener, you're, paying attention to what your passions are and trying to dial them in. If you don't know your purpose, that's probably the single quickest thing. If you can really do some thought into what's meaningful outside me that I get meaning out of being in service to, right? If you can do that. Now, Maslow's hierarchy doesn't always let us kind of express like that. If you don't make enough money to comfortably survive, if you're emotionally being challenged by friends or relationships, if some of those lower need states are not being met, then you being a great source of cause to other people or something may not be there, right? Like I know a lot of coaches who are struggling personally and they're trying to coach other people. And it's like, hey, like you got to get your own house in order really before you can help other people really well. But anyway, I want to inspire people. Literally just discovering your purpose or really deciding that matters to do is a really, really valuable endeavor. So certainly, seek out help to do that or find a way to do that on your own. The next move that I want to talk about, you were sharing about kind of being at cause to things, right? And then you were like, hey, there's some things we can't really do anything about, aging, et cetera, right? There are these things that kind of hit us in the face and they're outside of our control. I think that there's a really valuable thing in learning the value of surrender. Right. Yeah. And I don't mean just surrendering like you lost a war and it's not like this is horrible, it's a loss. I mean like a deep spiritual surrender of really being able to accept the moment as it is, right? Powerfully. And so there's two functions of the brain, if I were to simplify it down, and most people are lost in one of them and they have very little access to the other one, right? One is thinking. And if I ask most people, like, are you capable of stopping your thought, right? Can you take 10 breaths and just focus on the sensation of your breath? Most people will answer, sure, I can do it. And then if I were to test them, they're nowhere close, right? They can do a breath and a half, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, maybe 4 before you know it, thoughts are happening. And so when I first tried that years ago, it was shocking to me how not in control of my own mind I was, right? It was literally shocking. I was like, what's going on? Like, who is thinking these thoughts if not me? And the meaning making that's going on in most people's brains is so incessant and so loud that they're trying to drown it out with TV or with drinking or with sugar or with other sensations because it's just kind of going on all the time. And so like one level of consciousness is I'm thinking and I don't even know I'm thinking, but I'm thinking all the time and I'm not even aware of it, right? It's just, isn't that what everybody's doing? Like that's just what's happening all the time, right? The next level up is more of probably a suffering place, but it is a level higher, if you will, if we were to judge consciousness. It's, I'm thinking all the time and I know I'm thinking and I kind of can't stop it. And that's a place where we're really on we're self-concerned, we're worried, we're in anxiety, we're doing these things, and it's like, I don't know why, but I have trouble sleeping at night because I'm worried about the money or the this or the that, et cetera. The next level is one where we actually can move the switch away from thinking into the other side, which is experience, being able to literally turn off thought to some degree and sit more deeply in experience, right? Actually having this ability to just be with what is, whether it's pleasurable, whether it's anxiety, whether it's whatever those things are, not actually making meaning about it, but actually just being with what is, right? With the physical sensations of what is. Now people hear that and they're like, well, who cares? So what, right? But that ability to shut that thinking off, like let me back up for a second. If I say, hey, stop your thinking, most people have no idea what that means, right? It's like, what instruction do I give to my brain to stop thinking? But if I invite you instead, just feel what your breath feels like. Literally move your attention from the fantasy, from the thought, to literally the sensation of your breath, or the tingling in your hands, or whatever your feet feel like or your seat feels like. You've moved your attention, and that's not thinking. You can very quickly think about it. You can say, well, this feels dry, or this is, you can start to judge it and make judgments and thoughts about your sensations. But while you're just in the sensation, that's not thought. A different part of the brain actually lights up. And what happens is you're actually experiencing. You're in your physical sensation. And everybody's doing that back and forth all day long. But most people are putting on top of that this egoic thought that's just running all the time. And that ultimately leads to suffering, because there's really no path out of that. Because joy actually lives in the experience of when you can actually just be with what is, actually be arrived, be okay. What thinking tells you is, I've got to get there, right? But joy is always here. It's always in the now. It's always in this moment, right? And so if we have no ability to come into the now, if we can't build a mind that can slow thought and actually be in experience, then we're going to find that we're constantly chasing this future state. And even if we get there, even if we make the $1 million, or we get the girlfriend, or we buy the car, or whatever those things happen, it's fleeting, whatever that joy is. And then it's like, what's the next thing? Because we become searching, thinking machines instead of actually awake, present being machines, right? We are human beings.
Let me jump in a little, because it hits me that what you're describing in talking about being in the experience versus thinking about the experience, right, is the same thing as being an athlete and being in the flow of the game, right? Or the flow applies to anything that you're doing. You can be in the flow at work, but as soon as you start thinking about what you're doing, then you're out of the flow. And you can't sink a putt anymore, or whatever. Yeah, exactly, right. Or the non-PG version is, if you're making love with somebody or whatever, right? You're doing that, and all of a sudden if you're really in it, you're kissing their skin, and you're feeling the warmth, and you're smelling the smell of their neck, and you're really in it and present. That's one thing. If you all of a sudden become thinking about, is this good? Am I good? Are they good? Is this fun? What's happening? You've immediately left, right? There's this leaving of the immediacy of the moment, and you're now into judgment about it, right? That's a very different function of the mind. And if we don't grasp that, if we don't gain that skill, we're never going to have a whole lot to say about how we're directing that mind that's working, right? That's the meta skill to get to begin any serious mindset work, if you will. And that's also when you're in that flow state, that's also your connection to source, right? Yes. That's because you're not thinking about it. It's such a, I hope there's nobody out there who's never experienced this. But when you're in that state, man, just everything is right with the world, right? And you're not even thinking about the world. It's just everything is just good. Yeah. So it's like duality versus non-duality, right? Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with non-duality at all? Is that in the vocab or no? To a degree, but there's always, you never know who's going to be listening or watching. So So let's just do that real quick, right? So if you have a brain that is constantly judging things as good or bad, I would call that a mind that is behaving in duality.
right? Like that it is really, it's going, I like that, I don't like that, right? It's that pleasure and pain mode, right? That is two. It's, it's bad and it's good, and I'm playing in that world of duality. And the illusion there is that I'm going to get to more good, right? I'm going to keep working, and eventually we'll get rid of all this bad and I'll just have good, and that'll be great. What non-duality is, which a lot of spiritual teachers kind of talk about non-duality. Non-duality is when we actually slam into the moment and we're actually just with the isness of what is. It doesn't have judgment anymore. It actually just is the warmth in my stomach. It is the tingling in my chest. And if I were to judge it, I might realize, oh, that's anxiety, or that's, something else, right? That could really be judged bad or whatever. But I can remove that bad by just perceiving it differently and actually just being with what is, right? So now all of a sudden, every step on the ground becomes beautiful or interesting. But it's difficult because, as you were just talking about that flow state, it doesn't have to be this everything's right with the world. That's a very heightened experience of flow state, but it requires you judging it as really good, right? So you have to slam into duality to kind of name it and talk about it. But the actual experience of it, I'm
going to interrupt because
sure.
I would say that when you're in that moment, you're not thinking about that. You only make that judgment later.
Totally.
God, that was amazing.
That's my point. Is you kind of you leave it and you go, wow, like that was a really special way of being, right? But to my point is, everybody has access to this right now. Like as soon as you move your attention to your breath for just a fleeting moment, it may not be the most pleasurable experience ever, but that's a non-dual experience, right? You're not judging it. You're just like, oh, that is what my breath feels like. Oh, that is what my feet feel like on the ground. Now, chances are, as that becomes more of a skill for you, it will be more pleasurable to do that, right? The beginning wrestling match is work to sort of figure this out and understand it. But then, like everything, it becomes easier, and all of a sudden it's really beautiful. Here's the spiritual mistake that a lot of gurus make. Watch this, right? So we've got good and bad. Let's call that a thing, right? That's one way that the mind can be. And then we've got non-duality, which is not judging good or bad. It's just isness. Okay, we'll call it that. Well, all of a sudden, the spiritual teacher says, it's evolved to be non-dual. And if you're in duality, that's a lesser mind, right? So all of a sudden, non-dual is what? It's good. And duality is bad. And all of a sudden, what have we done? We've just nested duality. We've just actually made another kind of duality. So what's a more sound way to teach this and talk about this is to say they're both completely valid, right? Duality doesn't get thrown out as a bad way of being. We totally need to make judgments. There is good and bad. If we have a certain perspective and I have a certain tack on life and a certain set of values, there's things that serve that and things that erode that, and it's totally legitimate to call those good and bad. We're all living in that. To discount the normal experience of human life as not valid, right? That's why I would say out here saying it's really not real, we're discounting what the majority of consciousness would say to us is real, right? So I want to honor let's also call that real, but let's put our foot in this other thing and say, hey, can I actually live in a world where I have access to this non-duality, where I can take a sad moment and instead of doing the normal human thing, which is like, I've got to get away from this is horrible, I've got to fix it, can I actually just be with it and go, really be curious about what does sad feel like? And then you realize actually grief and sadness can be some of the most beautiful experiences you've ever had because you're not running from them. You can actually kind of open your mind to being with what is, right? That skill of being with what is. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm sure I'm not alone in trying to wrap my mind around how grief and sadness are going to feel like a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah.
Later, you can look back and go, this did so much for me. I learned such a great lesson, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you
I'm talking about literally in the moment. It becomes, so let's do this. If I'm not judging it as good or bad, why would I have any preference about what it is at all? And this might just be a thought experiment at this point. If we don't have a real grounding in non-dual, and I realize this is a brand new idea right in this moment, but if right now let's say we've got anxiety in my chest, right? I think that's something people understand what that feels like, and it might be different for all of us. It might be in your throat, might be in your belly, but for me, anxiety kind of shows up maybe in my chest. If I'm judging that, right, the immediate thing is this is bad. It's not optimal. It's not the way I'm supposed to feel, et cetera. And that does what? It tends to create more anxiety, right? It sort of heightens it and makes it worse. The other way to experience that is to take away all judgment of it, which is, this is a move that I'm inviting, let's just open to what this might be. If I can instead, just like I would just feel my breath without qualifying it as anything, I just get interested in, what is this sensation? Well, it feels a little warm. It's tingly. There's a tightness, whatever. If I take away the good and bad, all of a sudden I'm experiencing it in what I'm calling non-dual. There's just an isness to it. Right. From that isness, I don't have a preference. I'm not trying to run from it. I don't want it to go away. It requires me to judge it to want something else to happen. It requires me to move into time and space and thought, right? So I leave experience of what is, and I have to move into thought to go, this isn't optimal. I have to be different than this. And that creates this whole thing that is, in that moment, I can't really accept what is, right? And that is human suffering. All right. So I'll make it even more grounded. If somebody punches me in the arm really hard, right? The pain is the tingling of that. I'm not discounting the pain. That is a real neurological response to somebody punching me really hard in the arm. The suffering, though, is me resisting that. Okay. So as soon as that pain is there and I really don't want it to be there, my whole system starts to suffer. Oh, why did that happen? This is horrible. Am I in danger? Whatever else is going on. A more enlightened response to that is, I've just gotten punched in the arm and there's a tingling there. Now, clearly I might have to defend myself or whatever. Let's just take that out of this discussion. If we're just doing it to experience it, that punch in the arm, the pain is there, but if I don't judge it as bad or good, it's literally just a tingling in my arm. It's just a sensation. It may not be preferable, but that preference requires my judgment. That judgment is the invitation of duality. And what I'm suggesting is there's a kind of mind that can just be with what is, and actually you become, approaching infinitely more durable to the challenges of life. Mm-hmm. So sadness becomes literally just what is in the moment, and it doesn't stick around. It doesn't become that thing that I'm so hurt by all that. I genuinely feel sadness can actually be really beautiful because it just is what is. And then the next experience comes, right? And that's just a more enlightened way to experience our world.
What I'm hearing basically is you're describing, being the watcher, learning.
Yes, exactly.
That sort of third party perspective.
Yes,
and be observant of what is happening in your life and around you and all this without judging necessarily.
So I love that. So the watcher versus the judger, right? The watcher is completely okay with isness. It's just watching. It's just the experiencer of what is, right? The judger has lots of preferences. And if your judger is set up to be immature, young, small, selfish, whatever that is, right? We can imagine like a 13-year-old judger. I don't like this. I don't want to go there. No, this is bad. Wait, why'd you do that? This is hard.
Hi, this is Tim Starr. Thanks for joining me and Gabi on the universe between your ears. We really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us for a little while. And we'd like to see you again. So be sure to subscribe wherever it is you're consuming the podcast from, whether it's YouTube or Stitcher or iTunes or whatever the hell else is out there. We want to see you again. We also want to hear from you. So let us know what you think of each episode. Let us know if you got an idea for a future episode that you think would be just killer. Absolutely, let us know. All right? Thanks again, and we will see you next time around.